Hey there, and welcome to the Home Studio Rescue here on YouTube. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to be talking about how much I spent at audio school and what I learned going to the Blackbird Academy in Nashville. So, a little bit about me. I got married in 2014, and the week we got married, we went down to Nashville, and I ended up taking a tour of Blackbird, the Blackbird Academy. And the first thing I saw was Studio B, which is what's on the screen right here. And they had one of these, it's called a Fairchild, sitting on that area right there where all the gear is. And I was a big gear nerd at this point. I had been recording bands locally in Virginia for about 4 years, and I had what they call GAS, which is Gear Acquisition Syndrome. So when I saw one of these, this is about a $30,000 compressor. It's kind of like seeing a unicorn.
I will lose my mind.
And I said, wow, is that a real Fairchild? And they said, yeah. And I said, not many of these left around. They had 10 of them. So I was very obsessed with gear, so that meant a lot to me. And then they took me on a tour of the studio, and this is Studio D at Blackbird. They have surround sound. The studio looks a little bit different now, except for all this wood and diffusion is there. And we listened to Thriller in this room, and I was just blown away by it. So they do that for everyone. If you go to Blackbird now and do the tour, they'll probably play Thriller in Studio D for you. And then we went to the classroom, and this blurry photo here is a picture of their API 1608 console, 16 channels. This is about a $30,000 or $40,000 console. And then they have a rack of gear. And this is in the actual classroom. And here's a picture of me in class at that classroom after I started going there. That was 2 months later. After I went to Blackbird, I had to go. So I went to Blackbird, and the program is about 6 months, and I'm going to get into how much everything cost here in a second. So for a 6-month program, you're in a classroom like we just saw every other week, and then you're in one of their actual studios recording bands, recording Nashville session musicians. You record all types of music, and so every other week you're in the studio and you're in the classroom. Monday and Tuesday when you're in the studio is tracking days, and the rest of it is all overdubbed. So it was an amazing experience. All right, so here we are at the Blackbird Academy website. This is not meant to be just a complete advertisement for Blackbird, but this is a part of my story, and so I'm just sharing what I know and all that stuff. So these are some of the studios you get to work in. You learn Pro Tools, you learn how to track a band, you learn how to set up your session. Really, one of the most important things I learned was how to get my sessions ready for when musicians walk in. We're ready to record within about 10 or 15 minutes. We have all of our gear set up, everything's ready to go, and they teach you how to be a Pro Tools wizard and how to just be fast there, because that's what they use in Nashville. I'm pretty quick at Pro Tools, and they're really teaching you how to be assistant audio engineer to help run sessions for the main guy who's turning the knobs and all that stuff, but mostly you run cables and you learn how to run Pro Tools, and that's what an assistant audio engineer does in Nashville. That's what I learned there. And so just to start, if we go here and we look at their tuition, the tuition to go here back when it's about $23,000 for the 6-month program. They have the studio engineering and they have the live sound engineering. And what they said when we were at the studio engineering, it was about a classroom of 20 kids, 20 people. I was 30. I wasn't a kid, but what they said is, hey, there's only 6 people like in the live sound engineering program, that's probably changed by now. But they also said, we can get you a job almost immediately if you go into the live sound program. Most people, the people in my classroom, they wanted to stay in the audio engineering in the studio, and that's what I did. What's funny, though, is my job now is being a sound man at a church. And so really I ended up in live sound. There's a lot more gigs there. Especially in Nashville. So $23,000 is what it cost for tuition. And then for my wife and I we had to move to Nashville. We paid it was $900 worth of rent, but for our monthly expenses was about $1,500 a month. So that's $18,000. That's up to about $38,000 right there. And then you have to do all the normal living expenses. We had to buy furniture, which we still have at this house. I'm lucky enough that I own this house that I'm sitting in right now, and I owned it back then. We were able to rent it out, and that really helped. But both my wife and I had a 40-hour-a-week desk job that I quit because I just didn't want to do that anymore. Recording was a hobby at that point, and audio was a hobby. And my wife had a job in Virginia. And I got so obsessed by seeing this gear and seeing this amazing studio in Nashville that both her and I quit our jobs. We moved to Nashville, and we lived off of money that we had in the bank. And by the end of it, with tuition and all that stuff, I would say I spent probably around $50,000 going to audio school. And the plan was always for us to eventually come back to Virginia. That was kind of a bummer because, you know, I enjoyed going to the program and learning all that stuff, but I also know that it's very difficult to make a living from recording people here in Virginia, especially now with everybody basically having a home studio like what this channel is about. So I came back to Virginia and eventually I started getting jobs at churches and I had a long journey, and that's kind of what I do now. And I have some freelance clients, all that jazz. But the thing I would say about audio school is, especially in Nashville, is they were teaching me how to be an assistant audio engineer. And I got to do some internships and all kinds of really cool stuff. I got to intern with a guy named Ryan Hewitt, who's a Grammy Award winning mixer and audio engineer. He's done countless projects. I got to be mentored by Mark Rubel, and he said Paul McCartney told him it's not cool to name drop. But I actually got to be a runner on sessions with bands like The Fray. I got to be around John Oates from Hall and Oates. I got to watch Ryan Hewitt work with Third Eye Blind. This was all back in 2015. I really got a lot of awesome experiences. Some of the things I learned from audio school outside of how to use a console, how to run cables, like I can walk into pretty much any studio and use a console, or any church and use the console. I can figure out their console. I'm very comfortable in those situations. So they made it where I could just go in and out of most places when it comes to audio and be able to make things sound good and do my job. So that was really cool. I got to intern while I was in Nashville and all that stuff. A couple things I learned is that, one, it was just going to take a long time if I was going to stay in Nashville to work up that ladder just to be an assistant. You're working 5 to 6 12-hour days usually. That sometimes you're being an intern for a while and you're not really making anything. So for me, I was an Uber driver while I was in Nashville. You just kind of had to do whatever you had to do to kind of pay the bills. And that's still something. I mean, I still do gig work. I still do all kinds of stuff if I need to fill in the gaps financially. So it's not an easy life, especially here in Virginia, trying to do audio for a living. If I was a young person just out of high school and thinking about going into the studio business in Nashville or LA, trying to get into one of those commercial spaces, you're going to go through school. You don't have to go to school to get an internship. I'll tell you that right out the gate. And honestly, that is one of the things where I went to school for 6 months and I got an internship. And that's where everyone starts. And it doesn't matter if you go to audio school or if you just write a really heartfelt email to a studio owner and they say, yeah, come and be an intern here. That people are always looking for free help. So you don't need to go to audio school to do that. But I did do that. What I learned basically is that you need to be very careful about what you say when you're in the studio, that you can derail a session with your mouth very easily, especially if you say something like, oh, that song sounds like this. That could end the session. Musicians can be very insecure, so you have to be very careful with what you say in the studio. You also, first thing, you need to be a good hang. You can't be an asshole. And so sometimes that can be a difficult thing. For me, my mouth can get me into trouble, and other times, we all have bad days. But what I learned while I was at Blackbird is I didn't want to be an assistant audio engineer, and I also didn't want to work 6 to 12 days a week in a studio. At this point, I work about 3 days a week at a church, and that's good enough for me. And if you are thinking about going to audio school, those are kind of the costs that you need to think about. And then also, if you want to just have your own home studio and learn how to use that, you can do that here on YouTube. I can help you with that. That's something that I do. I coach people on the gear to buy, how to learn how to mix, how to use it, all that stuff. You don't need to spend $20,000, $50,000. Blackbird is a cheap school, honestly. To go to Full Sail, it's like 80 grand last time I checked. There's a lot of schools out there that are very expensive, and you're basically going to school for a job, which is, unless you're in Nashville, New York, or LA, these jobs don't exist. And the places they do, it's very competitive, and you really have to start at the bottom and work your way up. Would I recommend going to audio school? If you want to try to climb that ladder in Nashville, New York, or LA, then sure, go for it. But if you're just going to be in your own home studio trying to make your own music or maybe help your friends make music, you can learn everything you need to know. Now, there's going to be a link for a video about how I spent $20,000 on analog recording gear, doing analog summing and all this other stuff. If you want to learn more about that and what I learned from it and why I ended up selling most of that gear, click on the video right there.